Hey everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we get into our new episode, let's recap the incredible game-changing events from our last story. We saw the man known as Benjamin have a powerful, overwhelming memory breakthrough at a hospital after seeing his friend Hank's newborn baby. He remembered the name Lindy, and with it a profound sense of fatherly love. We then learned the shocking, dark truth of the past 4 years. Ty wasn't in a simple accident. He was held captive in a secret facility until his memory was erased, and then was helped to escape by a guilt-ridden supervisor. The story ended on a massive cliffhanger as Ty, armed with a few fragmented memories, asked his one true friend Hank to help him get back to Canada. If you missed that incredible jaw-dropping story, the full playlist is linked for you in the description below. If you're enjoying this new season, please take a second to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now today, the journey home begins. The decision, once made, was a point of no return. The 3 days that followed Ty's desperate plea to Hank were a whirlwind of quiet, tense, and clandestine preparation. The vast, open landscape of the Montana ranch, which had once been a place of anonymous refuge, now felt like a prison, its fences and routines a constant reminder of the life he was about to leave behind. He went through the motions of his work, his body on autopilot, mending fences and tending to the herd, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, in a place called Heartland, with a woman whose smiling face haunted his waking thoughts, and a daughter whose name was a constant, aching prayer on his lips. He spent his nights not sleeping, but planning. He gathered the meager possessions he had accumulated over 2 years of his life as Benjamin Cooper: a few worn-out plaid shirts, a pair of scuffed work boots, and a single well-read book of poetry he'd found in a bunkhouse trade. It wasn't much, but it was the entire physical evidence of a life he was about to discard. The most important part of his preparation was the money. He had been a relentless worker and a frugal man with no past and no future to spend on. He had saved almost every dollar he had earned from 2 years of back-breaking labor as a ranch hand and from the occasional under-the-table construction job in town. He gathered the cash from its hiding place, a loose floorboard beneath his bunk. It was a thick, worn wad of bills, held together by a rubber band. It wasn't a fortune, but it was all he had. It was the price of a bus ticket, of a cheap motel room, of a new beginning. It was just enough, he prayed, to pull off his impossible plan. Hank was his silent, steadfast co-conspirator. His friend, a man of simple loyalties and profound integrity, had agreed without hesitation, his decision a quiet, powerful testament to their bond. He had spent the last 2 days gathering the necessary supplies for Ty's journey: a sturdy, waterproof backpack, a high-quality compass, a detailed topographical map of the treacherous, unpatrolled border region between Montana and Alberta, and a small, practical survival kit. He was not just helping his friend, he was equipping a soldier for a dangerous, solitary mission. The farewell happened under the cover of a moonless, starless night. A thick blanket of clouds had rolled in, a welcome, secret-keeping shroud. Hank had told his wife he was going out to check on a sick calf, a simple, plausible lie to explain his late-night departure. He met Ty at the edge of the ranch property, a discreet distance from the sleeping bunkhouse. Ty threw his duffel bag into the back of Hank's old, beat-up pickup truck, and they drove away without a word, the familiar, comforting landscape of the ranch receding in the rearview mirror like a fading dream. They drove for 2 hours in a tense, comfortable silence, heading north on a series of dark, empty, and increasingly remote back roads. The paved highway eventually gave way to gravel, and then to a rough, 2-track dirt path that was barely a road at all. Hank finally pulled the truck to a stop in a small, sheltered clearing, surrounded by the dense, dark shapes of pine trees. He killed the engine, and the world was suddenly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the whisper of the wind through the high branches. This was it, the end of the line. Beyond the trees lay the invisible, imaginary line that separated two countries, the line that separated Ty from his past, from his family, from his very identity. "Well, this is as far as I can take you, man. The border is about 5 miles north of here, straight through those woods. The map will get you to the crossing point we talked about. Once you're across, it's another 10 miles or so until you hit a real road." He handed Ty the backpack, its weight a solid, comforting presence. Ty slung it over his shoulders, the straps a tangible reminder of the long, difficult journey that lay ahead of him. He stood by the side of the truck, the reality of what he was about to do finally hitting him with its full, terrifying force. He was about to willingly walk into a vast, dark wilderness, a man with no name, no memory, and no guarantee of what he would find on the other side. A flicker of profound, paralyzing doubt shot through him. Hank, sensing his friend's hesitation, got out of the truck and came to stand beside him. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of deep, brotherly concern. "You don't have to do this, Ben. For real, you can turn back right now. No one would blame you. You have a life here. A good one. It's not too late to just let the ghosts be ghosts." Ty looked at his friend, at the one true and decent friend he had made in this strange second life. He appreciated the offer, the easy way out, but he knew, with a certainty that was deeper than any fear, that it was already too late for that. The ghosts were no longer just haunting him. They were calling him home. He thought of the laughing woman in his dreams, of the profound, aching joy he had felt when he had spoken his daughter's name. To turn his back on them now, to choose this safe, empty life over the terrifying, beautiful possibility of a real one, it would be a betrayal of a part of his soul he had only just rediscovered.
I don't know if it's what I want.
He said, his voice a low, honest murmur, the words a perfect, simple truth.
I don't know anything, for sure. I don't know who that man in the picture is. I don't know if this Amy will even know who I am. I don't know if any of it is real. But it's what my heart tells me I have to do. It's the only thing that feels real anymore.
Hank looked at him, at the quiet, unshakable resolve in his eyes, and he knew there was no more arguing. He just nodded, a look of profound, sad respect on his face. "Well then, that's good enough for me." He pulled Ty into a hard, powerful, and deeply emotional hug, a final brotherly embrace. "You be safe out there, you hear me? You watch your back, and when you find them, when you find your family, you give him hell for losing you in the first place."
I will.
Ty's voice was thick with an emotion he couldn't name. They pulled apart, and with a final shared look of understanding, Ty turned his back on the truck, on his friend, on the only life he knew. He switched on the small, powerful flashlight Hank had given him, its beam cutting a lonely, hopeful path into the deep, dark woods. He took a deep breath, and then he took the first terrifying step on his long, impossible journey home. Hank stood by his truck and watched until the small, bobbing light of the flashlight was completely swallowed by the vast, unforgiving darkness of the northern wilderness. The moment Ty stepped off the dirt path and into the deep, untamed wilderness, the world was reduced to the small bobbing circle of light cast by his flashlight. The air, which had been cool and still in the clearing, was suddenly thick and close, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying pine needles, and the wild, musky smell of the forest itself. The friendly, familiar trees of the ranch were gone, replaced by a dense, claustrophobic tangle of lodgepole pine and thick, thorny undergrowth that seemed to grab at his clothes, to conspire to hold him back. The silence was absolute, a profound and deeply unnerving quiet that was broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing and the crunch of his boots on the unseen forest floor. He held the compass Hank had given him in one hand, the small, glowing needle pointing north, a fragile, man-made certainty in a world of natural, chaotic darkness. He had a map, but in the pitch black, with only a narrow flashlight beam to guide him, it was almost useless. He was relying on instinct, on a deep, primal sense of direction he didn't know he possessed, and on the simple, desperate hope that if he just kept walking north, he would eventually find his way. The first hour was a brutal, disorienting ordeal. The terrain was far more rugged than he had anticipated. He stumbled over unseen roots, his legs sinking into soft, mossy patches of ground that threatened to steal his boots. He pushed his way through thickets of brush so dense they were like walking through a wall of needles, the thorns tearing at his jacket and scratching his face and hands. Every few minutes he would stop, his heart hammering in his chest, and listen. He was listening for the sound of a truck, of a helicopter, of anything that might signal he was not alone in these woods, but the only sound was the pounding of his own blood in his ears. This was a far cry from the easy, romanticized idea of a man on a quest. This was a grim, punishing reality. He was a trespasser here, a ghost moving through a landscape that did not want him. And as the physical exhaustion began to set in, the mental battle began. The darkness was not just an absence of light, it was a canvas, and his own fractured mind began to paint terrifying images upon it. Every snap of a twig behind him was a border patrol agent. Every rustle of leaves in the distance was a predator. The distant, mournful cry of a coyote, a sound he had found comforting his entire life, was now a direct personal threat. He was beginning to understand the true, terrifying nature of his own amnesia. He was a man without a context. He didn't know if he was a man who was good in a crisis, if he was a man who was afraid of the dark. He was discovering himself in real time, and what he was discovering was a deep, primal well of fear. He stopped to rest, his back pressed against the rough bark of a massive pine, his lungs burning. He took a long drink from his canteen, the cool water a small, welcome comfort. He was tired, he was scared, and for a fleeting, desperate moment he thought of turning back. The thought of Hank's truck, of the quiet, anonymous safety of the Montana ranch, was a powerful, seductive siren song. He could go back. He could forget all of this. He could go back to being Benjamin, the quiet, competent man with no past and no problems. But then another image, more powerful than his own fear, flashed in his mind. The woman's smile. The brilliant, sun-drenched, and impossibly loving smile from his dream. The name Amy followed, a whisper in the silence of his own soul. He thought of the profound, aching joy he had felt when he had spoken his daughter's name, Lindy. They were not just ghosts, they were a destination. They were the north on his internal compass. A new wave of resolve, born of a love he couldn't remember but could feel in every fiber of his being, washed through him, extinguishing the fear. He pushed himself off the tree and began to walk again, his steps surer now, his purpose renewed. He was not just running from a forgotten past, he was running towards a future he desperately, profoundly needed to be real. The terrain began to change. The dense, claustrophobic forest started to thin, the ground becoming rockier, the incline steeper. He was climbing. He scrambled up a short, steep rock face, his fingers finding purchase in the cold, rough stone, his bleeding hands a distant, insignificant pain. He pulled himself over the top and found himself on a high, exposed ridge. And here, the world opened up. The thick canopy of trees was gone, replaced by the vast, open and star-dusted sky. A sliver of moon had risen, casting a pale, ethereal, and silvery light on the landscape below. He could see for miles. To the south, the dark, rolling expanse of the Montana wilderness he had just traversed. And to the north, he saw a different landscape. A series of long, low, and gently rolling hills, dotted with small, dark patches of aspen groves, the Alberta foothills. And then he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible line cut through the wilderness below, a narrow, cleared path in the trees that was not natural. It was the border. He had made it. He was looking at Canada. He let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. He slid down the other side of the ridge, his boots kicking up loose shale, and began the final triumphant leg of his crossing. He moved with a new, reckless energy, his exhaustion forgotten, fueled by the adrenaline of being so close. He finally reached the cleared borderline. It was not a grand thing. There was no fence, no wall. It was just a simple 20-foot wide path of cleared earth and low brush, a simple man-made scar on a vast, wild landscape. On a small metal post, a simple sign read, Canada. He stood at the edge of the line for a long, profound moment. On one side was the United States of America, the country where he had lived a quiet, empty life as a ghost named Benjamin. On the other side was Canada, a country that held the promise of a past, of a family, of an identity he had lost. It was the single most significant step of his life. He took a deep breath and he crossed. The moment his boot touched the soft Canadian soil, he expected to feel something, a surge of triumph, a sense of homecoming, but he felt nothing. The air was the same. The trees were the same. The silence was the same. He was still the same, lost, broken man, just in a different country. The imaginary line on the ground had changed nothing. The real journey, the journey to find himself, had only just begun. He pushed onward, his body now a screaming chorus of aches and pains. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving in its place a bone-deep, profound exhaustion. He walked for what felt like an eternity, his mind a numb, empty blank, his legs moving on pure, mechanical will. He just had to find a road. That was his only thought. Find a road. Just as the first pale light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink, he stumbled out of the woods and onto the hard, welcome surface of a paved two-lane highway. He had done it. He had made it through the wilderness. He stood on the edge of the empty road, a lone, disheveled, and utterly exhausted figure, the vast, empty landscape of the Alberta foothills stretching out before him, a beautiful, intimidating, and unknown country. He was closer to home than he had been in 4 long years, and he had never in his entire life felt more completely and utterly alone. The sun rose with a brutal, unforgiving clarity, casting its golden light on a landscape that offered no comfort. The 2-lane highway was a long, black ribbon of asphalt, stretching to an empty horizon in both directions, a stark, man-made scar on the vast, wild beauty of the Alberta foothills. For Ty, the arrival of the daylight was not a relief. It was an exposure. In the darkness, he had been a shadow, a ghost moving through the wilderness. Now, in the bright, clean light of morning, he was just a man, a dirty, disheveled, and utterly exhausted man, standing on the side of an empty road, 1,000 miles from a life he didn't know, and 100 miles from a home he couldn't remember. He was a mess. His clothes were torn and stained with dirt and pine sap from his long night in the woods. His hands were a crisscrossing map of cuts and scratches from the branches and rocks. A 4-day-old beard, which had been a symbol of his rugged ranch hand life in Montana, now just made him look like a vagrant. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that he was not an approachable figure. He was the kind of man that people lock their car doors for. But he had no choice. He had to keep moving. He picked a direction east, towards the rising sun, and he began to walk, his heavy, mud-caked boots a painful, rhythmic punishment on the hard asphalt. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The adrenaline that had fueled his desperate nighttime crossing had long since worn off, leaving in its place a bone-deep, profound exhaustion that was a physical, crushing weight. After an hour of walking, he finally heard it. The distant, growing hum of an approaching engine. He stopped and turned, his heart giving a small, hopeful flicker. A late-model sedan, clean and respectable, appeared on the horizon, growing steadily larger. He stepped to the very edge of the gravel shoulder, raised a hand, and stuck out his thumb, the classic, universal gesture of a man in need. The car did not slow down. As it passed him in a whoosh of displaced air, he could see the driver, a middle-aged woman, her face a mask of polite, deliberate indifference as she stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact. It was the first of many such rejections. Car after car, pickup truck after pickup truck, they all passed him by. Some slowed down out of curiosity, their occupants staring at the strange, rough-looking man on the side of the road, before speeding up and disappearing into the distance. Others didn't even seem to see him. He was an inconvenience, a piece of human scenery to be ignored. With every vehicle that passed, a new layer of cold, hard despair began to settle over him. He had been so focused on the physical challenge of crossing the border that he had never truly considered the social one. He was a ghost, an undocumented man, and the world of ordinary, respectable people had no place for him. He had been walking for nearly 3 hours, the sun now high and hot in the sky, his canteen long since empty. His hope, which had been a burning flame just a few hours ago, had dwindled to a tiny, flickering ember. He was on the verge of giving up, of simply sitting on the side of the road and waiting for whatever came next when he heard a new sound. It was a deeper, rumbling sound, the sound of a much larger engine. A massive, older model transport truck, a classic Peterbilt with a long flatbed trailer, appeared on the horizon. It was a beautiful, formidable beast of a machine, its chrome grille glinting in the sun. It was his last, best hope. He stood up a little straighter, took a deep breath, and stuck out his thumb one last time. He watched as the truck approached, his heart pounding. He expected it to roar past him like all the others. But then, a miracle happened. The truck's air brakes let out a long, loud, and beautiful hiss, and the massive vehicle began to slow down, its huge tires kicking up a cloud of gravel as it pulled onto the wide shoulder about 100 yards ahead of him. A surge of pure, unadulterated relief, so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He broke into a clumsy, exhausted jog, his heavy backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He reached the passenger side door, his chest heaving, and looked up. The driver, a man in his late 50s with a kind, world-weary face, a thick gray beard, and a faded baseball cap, leaned across the cab and cranked the window down. "You look like you're having a worse day than I am. Where are you headed?" His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, full of the easy, laconic charm of a man who had spent his life on the road.
East. Anywhere east.
Ty's own voice was a dry, cracked whisper. The driver looked him over, his gaze sharp and appraising. He saw the exhaustion, the dirt, the desperation, but he also saw something else. He saw the fundamental decency, the quiet, desperate hope in the younger man's eyes. He made a decision. Well, I'm headed for Calgary. Hop in. The company's not much, but the air conditioning works.
Thank you.
Ty breathed, the words full of a gratitude so profound it was almost a prayer.
Thank you so much.
He threw his backpack onto the floor and climbed up into the high, comfortable cab. The cool blast of the air conditioning on his hot, grimy skin was the most wonderful feeling in the world. As the truck rumbled back onto the highway, a sense of profound, almost surreal safety settled over him. The driver, whose name was Frank, was a man of few words at first, giving Ty the space to recover. He handed him a bottle of water, which Ty drained in a series of long, desperate swallows. After a while, the simple human kindness of a shared, quiet space began to break down the walls Ty had built around himself. So, what's your story? If you don't mind me asking, you don't look like you're out for a Sunday stroll. Ty hesitated. He had been a man without a story for 2 long years. Now he had the fragmented, unbelievable beginnings of one. He looked at the man beside him, at his kind, non-judgmental face, and he decided to take a risk. He decided to tell a piece of the truth.
It's complicated. I'm trying to find someone, a woman, and her daughter. I think they might be my family.
He told Frank a simplified, edited version of his story. He didn't mention the captivity, the brainwashing. He just spoke of a bad accident, of a long period of amnesia, of fragmented dreams, and a desperate cross-country journey to find a woman whose name he had only recently remembered. Frank listened to the whole incredible tale without a single interruption, his gaze steady on the road ahead. When Ty had finished, Frank was quiet for a long moment, a thoughtful, considering look on his face. That's one hell of a story, son. So what's this woman's name? The one you're looking for?
Amy Fleming.
Frank's eyes, which had been focused on the road, suddenly shot over to him, his eyebrows raised in a look of profound, shocked recognition. A slow, disbelieving grin began to spread across his face. Amy Fleming? From Heartland? Ty stared at him, his heart giving a sudden, powerful lurch.
You know her?
Know her? Son, everyone in Alberta knows Amy Fleming. She's a living legend, the horse whisperer. My own sister took a troubled horse to her a few years back, a horse that was bound for the slaughterhouse. Amy had that animal eating out of her hand in a week. She's the real deal. A miracle worker, they say. The words, the casual, offhand confirmation of her existence, of her gift, of her reality, were a balm to Ty's soul. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't chasing a ghost. She was real.
So, Heartland. It's a real place?
Real as this truck. Frank chuckled, a warm, booming sound that filled the cab. It's a big family outfit. Been in her family for generations. Beautiful piece of land, right up there in the foothills, not too far from Hudson. I pass the turnoff for it every week on this run. He looked over at Ty, his eyes full of a new, profound respect and a deep human sympathy. So that's your Amy Fleming, huh? Well, son, it looks like you're finally headed in the right direction. Ty just nodded, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his own face. He turned and looked out the window at the passing landscape, at the rolling green hills and the distant majestic mountains. It was no longer a strange, intimidating, and unknown country. It was home. He was a long way from the front door, but for the first time in 4 long years, he was finally, truly on the right road. The cab of Frank's Peterbilt truck had become a small, rolling sanctuary, a haven of quiet kindness in the middle of a vast and indifferent landscape. For Ty, the last few hours had been a slow, steady, and miraculous return to the world of the living. The simple act of conversation, of sharing a piece of his unbelievable story, and being met not with disbelief, but with a simple human acceptance, was a powerful, healing balm to his fractured soul. Frank, the kind, world-weary truck driver, had become an unlikely guardian angel, the first person in this new world to offer him a hand without asking for anything in return. As they drove deeper into the heart of the Alberta foothills, Frank continued to talk, his gravelly voice a comforting, steady rumble against the hum of the engine. He was telling stories not just about his own life on the road, but about the local legend of Amy Fleming and the Heartland Ranch. Yeah, my sister. She lives just outside of Millerville. Had this beautiful mare, a real spitfire. got spooked by a cougar one spring, and after that she was a different animal, vicious, wouldn't let anyone near her. The vets all said to put her down, said she was a lost cause. My sister was heartbroken. As a last resort, she took her to Heartland. Ty listened, his entire being focused on the story, on every precious detail about the woman whose face haunted his dreams. And this Amy, she didn't do anything special, my sister said. She didn't use any ropes, any force. She just stood with the horse. For hours, just talking to it. And by the end of the week, that mare was following her around the pen like a lost puppy. A complete transformation. My sister says it wasn't training, it was magic. The story, a simple, second-hand account, was a profound confirmation for Ty. He wasn't just chasing a pretty face he'd seen in a picture, he was chasing a woman of substance, of power, of a quiet, gentle magic that resonated with a part of his soul he couldn't name. The feelings of familiarity, of connection, they weren't just in his head, they were real. By the time the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the vast prairie in shades of orange and deep purple, Ty's exhaustion had become a crushing physical weight. Frank, noticing the way the younger man's head was beginning to nod, made a decision. "All right, son, you look like you're about to fall over. There's a little motel up the road in the next town. Nothing fancy, but the beds are clean and the coffee's hot. My treat. You need a real night's sleep before you go knocking on any long-lost doors." Ty tried to protest, to refuse the man's overwhelming generosity, but he was too tired to argue. An hour later, they pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Foothills Motel, a classic single-story roadside establishment. Frank got them 2 adjoining rooms, paid in cash, and with a final paternal clap on Ty's shoulder, he said goodnight. "I'm heading out before dawn. You get some rest. Heartland's only a couple of hours from here. You're almost home." The motel room was a small, anonymous box of beige walls, a lumpy bed, and a single, flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom. But to Ty, it was a palace. He stood under the shower for a long time, the hot water washing away the dirt, the grime, and some of the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of the last 2 days. He was clean, he was safe, and for the first time, he was close. The thought of seeing her tomorrow, of finally standing in front of the woman from his dreams, was a terrifying, exhilarating, and brilliant light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. He lay down on the lumpy bed, still wrapped in a towel, the thin blanket pulled up to his chin. He expected to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep instantly, but his mind, now safe and quiet, had other plans. It had been poked and prodded all day, stimulated by the stories, by the proximity to home, by the sheer, overwhelming reality of his own quest. And now, in the quiet darkness of the motel room, the walls he had built around his own lost history began to crumble. It started as a single, fleeting image. Amy's smiling face, the one he had remembered by the campfire, so brilliant and so full of love. But this time, the image stayed. It was followed by another. The 2 of them, younger, standing by a river, laughing, and another. Him holding a tiny, perfect newborn baby, his heart so full of a fierce, protective love it was a physical pain. The beautiful, golden memories began to flow, a warm, welcome river of a life he had forgotten. But then, the river turned cold. A new image, sharp, sterile, and terrifying, intruded. A white room. A man in a doctor's coat, his face cold and clinical, his eyes like chips of ice, a feeling of profound, terrifying helplessness. The image was gone as quickly as it came, but it left a residue of pure, cold fear. Then another, a feeling of being trapped, of being in a small, dark space. The sound of his own voice, screaming, a sound of raw, animal terror. And then another, the sight of a man's face, a man he didn't know, his expression one of deep, sorrowful pity. The feeling of being pushed into the back of a truck, of being driven away into the darkness, with no idea where he was going or why. The memories, the good and the terrible, began to crash together in his mind in a violent, chaotic torrent. The beautiful, sun-drenched image of Amy's smile would be violently ripped away, replaced by the cold, sterile image of the doctor's face. The feeling of holding his newborn daughter, so full of love and hope, would be instantly followed by the feeling of being a helpless, terrified prisoner. The laughter and the screams, the warmth and the cold, the love and the cruelty, it all began to merge into a single, overwhelming and agonizing symphony of a life that had been both beautiful and horrific. He sat bolt upright in bed, a strangled cry escaping his lips, his body drenched in a cold sweat. His head was pounding, a violent percussive rhythm that was a physical manifestation of the war that was raging in his own mind. He was not just a man who had lost a beautiful life. He was a man who had survived a terrible, violent trauma. He now had two sets of ghosts to contend with, the beautiful, heartbreaking ghosts of the family he had lost, and the dark, terrifying ghosts of the men who had taken them from him. He stumbled into the small, sterile bathroom and splashed cold water on his face, his reflection in the cheap, cracked mirror a stranger to him. He was a man with two pasts, and he understood neither of them. The initial simple and romantic quest, to find the woman he loved and reclaim his life now, seemed like a childish, naive fantasy. How could he possibly walk up to her door, this woman from his beautiful golden memories, when he was now carrying this new, dark, and terrifying baggage? What if he brought this violence, this trauma, this darkness, into her peaceful, beautiful world? The thought was a new and even more profound kind of horror. He was no longer just a ghost. He was a monster. He slid down the cold, tiled wall of the bathroom and sat on the floor, his head in his hands, the flickering fluorescent light a harsh, unforgiving glare. He was so close. He was just a few hours from the end of his journey, and he had never in his entire complicated and forgotten life felt more completely and utterly lost. The sun rose, its brilliant, unforgiving light flooding the small, cheap motel room. For Ty, who had not slept, the dawn was not a promise of a new day, but an unwelcome illumination of his own fractured, terrified state. He had spent the long, dark hours on the cold bathroom floor, caught in the violent, chaotic crossfire of his own returning memories. The beautiful, golden ghosts of his life with Amy and Lindy were now inextricably tangled with the dark, terrifying phantoms of his captivity. He was a man at war with his own past, a past he didn't even fully understand. The simple, romantic quest he had embarked on from Montana now felt like a distant, naive dream. He had been a man searching for a home, for a family. Now, he was a man who felt like a threat. How could he possibly walk up to the door of that beautiful, peaceful ranch he'd seen in pictures, a place called Heartland, and bring this new, dark, violent trauma with him? How could he look into the eyes of the laughing woman from his dreams and tell her that his past was not just a blank space but a black hole, full of a cruelty and a violence he couldn't yet name? The thought was a new and even more profound kind of horror. He wasn't just a ghost who had lost his past. He was a monster who was just beginning to remember it. He finally, mechanically, got to his feet. He looked at his own reflection in the cheap, cracked mirror above the sink. The face that stared back at him was a stranger's. It was the face of a man who had survived something terrible, his eyes holding a haunted, weary knowledge that he didn't even know he had. He was no longer just the quiet, competent ranch hand named Benjamin. He was someone else, someone dangerous. A soft knock on the adjoining door made him jump, his entire body tensing with a sudden, primal surge of adrenaline, a fight-or-flight response he didn't understand. "Hey son, you awake in there? I'm heading out in about 20 minutes. It was Frank, the kind, steady truck driver, the voice of the real, normal world. Ty took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the panic down. He opened the door. Frank stood there, a styrofoam cup of coffee in each hand, his face a mask of easy, paternal concern. He took one look at Ty's pale, sweat-sheened face, and his bloodshot eyes and his friendly smile faltered. "Whoa there, you look like you've been wrestling with demons all night."
Something like that.
Ty's voice was a low, rough rasp. He took the offered coffee, his hand trembling slightly. "Well, you ready for the final leg? I can get you within 5 miles of the turnoff for that Heartland place." Ty looked at the man, at his simple, honest kindness, and a wave of profound, desperate gratitude washed over him. But the thought of going to Heartland, of showing up on Amy's doorstep in this state, was now an impossibility. He couldn't do it. Not like this. An hour later, Frank's big rig rumbled to a stop at a dusty, nondescript crossroads in the heart of the Alberta foothills. To the north was a small, quiet country road. "All right, son, this is it. That road there will take you right to it. Another few miles, and you'll be home." He had given Ty a map, a simple hand-drawn treasure map, with the location of the Heartland Ranch clearly marked with an X. Ty held the map in his hand, its flimsy paper a tangible, heavy weight. He looked down the road, towards the place that held all the answers, the place that held the beautiful, laughing woman and the little girl whose name was the sound of joy. It was right there. He was so close. He turned to Frank, his face a mask of profound internal conflict.
Frank, I can't thank you enough For everything. The ride, the room, the kindness. I won't forget it.
Don't you mention it, son? It's a good story. I just hope it has a happy ending for you. Now go on, go get your family back. Ty nodded, but he didn't move. He shouldered his backpack, the weight of his few belongings a familiar, grounding presence. He got out of the truck and stood on the gravel shoulder, the vast, beautiful, and intimidating landscape of the foothills stretching out around him. He looked at the mark on the map, the X that was supposed to be the end of his journey, but he knew, with a new sober certainty, that it wasn't. It was just the beginning of a different, more difficult one. He was a man who didn't know who he was. He was a man who was just beginning to remember a past that was full of a terrifying darkness. To show up on their doorstep now, a broken, haunted stranger, would be a selfish, reckless act. He couldn't bring this chaos, this danger into their peaceful lives, not until he understood it himself. He had to find work. He had to find a place to stay, a place to lay low. He had to investigate his own past, to understand the full scope of what had been done to him, to understand the monster that was sleeping inside of him. He had to find Ty Borden before he could present himself to Amy Fleming. He looked down the quiet country road that led north, the road that led to home, and then, with a look of grim, heartbreaking resolve on his face, he turned and began to walk in the opposite direction, south, towards the small, anonymous town they had just passed through. His new mission was no longer just to find his family. It was to find himself first. He was a ghost, and before he could come home, he had to figure out how to become a real person again. He walked down the long, empty road, a solitary, determined figure, leaving the map and the promise of Heartland behind him, for now.